Most folks assume a newer house should be a better house. Better insulation, better windows, better materials, better technology. And on paper, that's true. So here's a question that's been bothering me for a long time. If modern homes are so much better, why are so many homeowners fighting mold, humidity, musty smells, and moisture problems that seem to appear out of nowhere? You spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a new house. Then 6 months later, you're buying dehumidifiers. You're running bathroom fans. You're checking behind furniture. You're worrying about what's growing inside the walls. Meanwhile, some old Appalachian farmhouse, built over 100 years ago, is still standing on a hillside, breathing just fine. Now, don't get me wrong. Old homes absolutely had problems. They leaked, they creaked, they needed maintenance. But moisture wasn't managed the same way. That's the important part. The builders who raised those homes didn't have dehumidifiers. They didn't have moisture sensors. They didn't have mold remediation companies. What they did have was a deep understanding of how water behaves. They knew where moisture came from. They knew where it wanted to go. And most importantly, they knew how to help a house dry itself naturally. Today, we try to fight moisture with machines. Back then, they tried to prevent moisture from getting trapped in the first place. And once you understand that difference, a lot of modern housing problems suddenly start making sense. Because the real question isn't why mold appears. The real question is why so many modern homes accidentally create the perfect conditions for mold to grow. And that's where this story begins.
When people discover mold in their home, most assume it came from outside. Maybe the rain got in. Maybe the basement leaked. Maybe a pipe burst somewhere. And yes, those things can absolutely cause mold. But here's something most homeowners never think about. You are producing moisture right now. Every single day. Every shower, every pot of boiling water, every load of laundry, even every breath you take. A family of 4 can release several gallons of water vapor into the air during an ordinary day just by living inside the house. Think about that for a moment. Several gallons. Not buckets of water sitting on the floor. Invisible water floating through the air. Now here's where things get interesting. That moisture has to go somewhere. It doesn't disappear. It moves. It looks for cool surfaces. It looks for hidden spaces. It looks for attics, walls, crawl spaces, and corners where air doesn't move. And when enough moisture gathers in those places, mold doesn't need much else. It already has what it wants. Food is everywhere. Wood, paper, dust, drywall. The only thing mold truly needs is moisture. That's why mold isn't really a mold problem. It's a moisture problem. And old Appalachian builders understood something that many modern builders forgot. The goal wasn't to make a house completely airtight. The goal was to make sure moisture never stayed trapped for very long. Because once moisture gets trapped, mold usually follows. And the next thing we're going to look at is the exact moment home building philosophy changed. The moment builders stopped helping houses breathe and started trying to seal them shut.
If you could travel back and walk through an Appalachian farmhouse 100 years ago, one thing would surprise you immediately. You'd feel air moving. Not because somebody turned on a fan. There were no fans. The house simply breathed. Air moved through cracks, around windows, through attics, through floorboards, through porches. And before anybody jumps into the comments, yes, some of that air leakage wasted heat. Old builders knew that. They weren't stupid. But they also understood something modern construction often struggles with. A little airflow can solve a lot of problems, especially moisture problems. Then everything changed. As energy costs rose,
builders began chasing efficiency. Houses became tighter. Windows became tighter. Walls became tighter. Everything became tighter. And in many ways, that's a good thing. Lower heating bills, lower cooling bills, better comfort. But there was an unintended consequence. The moisture stayed inside too. The same steam from your shower, the same water from cooking, the same humidity from daily life. Instead of escaping naturally, much of it started getting trapped inside increasingly sealed buildings. Now, modern builders created solutions: bathroom fans, range hoods, HVAC systems, dehumidifiers, mechanical ventilation. And when those systems work correctly, they can do a fantastic job. But old Appalachian homes approached the problem differently. Instead of depending on machines to remove moisture after it appeared, they used design to reduce moisture buildup in the first place. And one of the smartest examples of that thinking was something most people walk past every day without ever noticing: the porch. And once you understand what that porch was really doing, you'll never look at an old farmhouse the same way again.
If you ask most folks what a porch is for, they'll probably tell you the same thing. A place to sit, a place to drink coffee, a place to watch the sunset. And they're not wrong. But around Appalachia, the porch had another job, one that most modern builders rarely talk about. It protected the house itself. Think about what happens every time rain hits a wall. The siding gets wet, the joints get wet, the windows get wet. The structure absorbs moisture. Now, imagine reducing that exposure day after day, year after year. That's exactly what a deep porch does. Instead of rain striking the walls directly, much of it lands several feet away from the structure. The walls stay drier. The windows stay drier. The foundation stays drier. But that's only half the story. The porch also controlled sunlight. During summer, when the sun sits high overhead, a deep porch shades walls and windows from direct solar heat. Less heat means less condensation risk. Less temperature swing means less moisture trouble. The old builders may not have used modern building science terminology, but they understood the results. Keep the structure dry. Keep the sun under control. Give the house a chance to breathe. And that's exactly what the porch helped accomplish. Today, many homes have decorative overhangs. Some have none at all. The old Appalachian porch was different. It was part of the environmental control system. And as important as the porch was, it wasn't even the smartest moisture control tool old builders used, because the walls themselves were helping the house stay dry.
Most people think a wall has one job: keep the weather outside. Simple.
But old builders thought differently. They expected moisture. They expected damp weather. They expected humidity. So they built walls that could recover from it. One of the biggest differences was the materials. Traditional homes often used solid wood, lime-based finishes, natural plasters, and other materials that could absorb small amounts of moisture and then release it back into the air later. In other words, the wall could breathe. Not breathe like a person, but breathe enough to help regulate moisture movement. Modern homes often rely on layers of synthetic materials, barriers, membranes, paints, adhesives, and tightly sealed assemblies. Again, those systems can work very well when everything is installed correctly, but when moisture gets trapped inside them, drying becomes much harder. That's where problems begin, because mold doesn't care how expensive the house was. It doesn't care how new the drywall is. It only cares whether moisture remains trapped long enough. The old builders understood something important. You cannot stop every drop of moisture. You can only manage it. That's why many traditional structures focused less on creating a perfect barrier and more on creating pathways for drying. The wall got damp, then it dried. The attic got warm, then it vented. The porch got wet, then it dried. Everything worked together. And nowhere was that philosophy more obvious than in the way old builders handled airflow through the entire structure.
Here's something I want you to picture. A summer afternoon. Hot air rising through a farmhouse. No air conditioning, no powered ventilation, no electric exhaust fans. Yet somehow, the house remains surprisingly comfortable. How? Because the builders understood a simple fact. Hot air rises. Today, building scientists call it the stack effect. Old builders simply called it common sense. Warm air naturally wants to move upward. If that air can escape through the upper portions of a structure, fresh air can enter below. A natural circulation begins. The house starts helping itself. You see evidence of this everywhere in traditional Appalachian construction. Attic vents, ridge openings, window placement, transoms above doors, high ceilings, tall stairways. Many of these features weren't random design choices. They were part of a passive airflow system. The goal wasn't necessarily to cool the house. The goal was to prevent heat and moisture from becoming trapped. Because trapped heat and trapped moisture often work together. The warmer the air becomes, the more moisture it can hold. Then, when that warm air reaches a cooler surface, condensation forms. And condensation is exactly what mold wants. Old builders may not have had moisture meters, but they knew a damp, stagnant building was asking for trouble. So they designed movement into the structure itself. And that brings us to something modern homeowners produce every single day without realizing how much of it exists: humidity.
Most moisture problems start with something invisible. Not rain, not leaks, not floods. Humidity. The challenge with humidity is that you rarely notice it until something goes wrong. A window starts fogging. A closet smells musty. A corner develops dark spots. Then, suddenly, everyone starts looking for mold. But the moisture was there long before the mold appeared. Think about a normal day. Someone takes a shower. Someone cooks dinner. Someone runs a load of laundry. Several people sleep inside the house. Every one of those activities releases moisture into the air. And unlike a century ago, many modern homes are designed to keep air from escaping. Again, this improves energy efficiency, but it also means moisture management becomes much more important. The old Appalachian approach wasn't perfect, but it naturally encouraged air exchange. Moisture rarely stayed trapped for long. Today's houses often depend on mechanical systems to perform the same task, and when those systems aren't running correctly, the moisture starts building up. The result isn't immediate. It happens slowly, week after week, month after month, until one day the homeowner discovers a problem that seems to have appeared out of nowhere. But here's the fascinating part. The place where old builders were most obsessed with moisture wasn't the walls, it wasn't the porch, and it wasn't even the living room. It was the roof. Because they knew something every experienced builder eventually learns. A wet roof can create problems throughout an entire house. If moisture is moving through a house, eventually much of it ends up heading upward. That's just physics. Warm air rises, and warm air often carries moisture with it. The old builders understood this long before anyone used terms like vapor drive or building envelopes. They simply knew attics needed airflow. That's why many traditional roofs were surprisingly well ventilated. Air entered, air exited. Heat escaped, moisture escaped. The attic stayed healthier. Today, some modern attics are engineered extremely well. But when ventilation is inadequate, moisture can linger. And once moisture lingers, wood, insulation, and structural materials can begin experiencing problems. Old builders feared trapped moisture. Not because they understood mold spores, but because they understood rot. Rot meant repairs. Rot meant expense. Rot meant failure. So they treated moisture like an enemy that needed an escape route. Everything had a way out. The attic, the walls, the porch, the crawl space. The entire structure worked together. And the more I studied these old homes, the more I realized something surprising. The biggest difference between old houses and modern houses isn't the materials. It's the philosophy. And that philosophy changed everything. Somewhere along the way, home building priorities shifted. And to be fair, many of those changes were improvements. Homes became warmer in winter, cooler in summer, more comfortable, more energy efficient. Nobody is arguing against that. But every solution creates new problems. The old builders spent most of their time asking, how do we help a house dry? Modern builders often ask, how do we stop air movement? Both goals make sense, but they're not the same thing. When houses became tighter, moisture management became more dependent on mechanical systems. Bathroom fans, kitchen exhausts, whole house ventilation, dehumidifiers, HVAC systems. In many modern homes, these systems are no longer optional. They're essential. The house depends on them. And when they stop working, moisture problems can begin surprisingly fast. That's one of the biggest differences between old and modern construction. Old homes often relied on design. Modern homes often rely on equipment. Neither approach is perfect, but it does explain why many homeowners are shocked when mold appears in a house that's only a few years old. Because the problem isn't always the age of the house. Sometimes it's the way the house manages moisture. And that leads to a question most homeowners never ask. What happens when moisture gets trapped where nobody can see it?
If water drips from your ceiling, you'll notice it immediately. If a pipe bursts, you'll know. Those aren't the moisture problems that worry experienced builders. The dangerous moisture is hidden moisture. The moisture trapped behind drywall, inside wall cavities, under flooring, around insulation, inside roof assemblies. The moisture nobody sees. And that's exactly why mold catches people by surprise. By the time mold becomes visible, the moisture problem may have existed for months, sometimes longer. Old Appalachian builders weren't fighting mold. They were fighting moisture accumulation. Because they understood a simple truth. A structure that dries quickly is a structure that survives. Think about a barn. Think about an old smokehouse. Think about a spring house. None of those structures stayed perfectly dry all the time, but they were designed to recover, to shed water, to release moisture, to dry out. That idea appears over and over again in traditional Appalachian construction. Not perfection, recovery. The builders expected nature to happen. Rain would happen, humidity would happen, condensation would happen. So instead of trying to build a house that never got wet, they focused on building a house that could dry itself afterward. And that philosophy might be the most important lesson we've forgotten. The more I study these old Appalachian systems, the more I realize they were solving a different problem than we are today. Modern homeowners often focus on comfort. Old builders focused on resilience. Those aren't the same thing. Resilience means the house keeps working even when conditions aren't perfect, even when it rains for a week, even when humidity rises, even when temperatures swing. That's why so many traditional building features seem strange today. The deep porch, the tall ceiling, the vented attic, the operable windows, the breathable materials. Individually, each feature seems small. Together, they create a system. And that's the word I want you to remember. System. Because mold prevention wasn't hidden inside one magic material. It wasn't one secret trick. It wasn't one forgotten invention. It was dozens of small decisions working together. Every feature helped moisture move. Every feature helped the structure dry. Every feature reduced the chance that dampness would remain trapped. That's why old homes often appear deceptively simple. The genius isn't in one component. The genius is in how everything works together. And once you see that, you start looking at modern houses very differently. Because the real lesson isn't about the past. It's about what we choose to build next. So let's go back to the question we started with. Why are new homes moldier than old ones?
The answer isn't that old builders were smarter. And it certainly isn't that old houses were perfect. They weren't. But many old builders understood something we've become very good at forgetting. Moisture is going to happen. You can fight that reality, or you can design around it. The old Appalachian approach wasn't about eliminating moisture. It was about managing it, helping it move, helping it escape, helping the house recover. That's why you'll find so many traditional features repeating across the mountains. Porches, ventilation, breathable materials, airflow, roof ventilation, shaded walls, drying pathways. These weren't random traditions. They were practical solutions developed by people who had to live with the consequences of their building decisions. And maybe that's the real reason these systems still matter today. Not because we should abandon modern construction, not because we should all move into century-old farmhouses, but because some of the problems we're facing aren't new at all. The people who came before us faced them too. And sometimes, the smartest way forward is taking another look at what they already figured out. The next time you walk past an old Appalachian home, don't just see an old building. Look closer. You might be looking at a moisture control system that's been quietly working for over 100 years. And most people never even notice it.